Welcome back. So in the last video, I left you with a challenge to essentially set up this node group. Now, our node tree at the moment is quite simple. We're going to take all these nodes and turn them into a node group. So we're just going to use Control G. And now we have that node group. And as I went along making this, I did suggest a few of the different settings that we might be using within our group inputs. So hopefully you managed to get those okay. Now we have a few set up already for our outputs, so let's just do that really quickly here. So I'll go into the group, and this first result is going to be our diffuse color. This second result is going to be our roughness. And also we can change that type to a float, because this is only ever going to be values. We're never going to have RGB going into that. This color ramp is going to be our height. And again, this is going to be a float value as well. Now, if you're worried about these RGB values going into values, we can always add a converter in there. We have RGB to black and white that we can plug in. We can plug those in. You see, it doesn't make any difference to the map at all, but it does make it a little bit cleaner where we have a yellow going into a yellow and then a grey going into a grey on both of these. But it's not necessary to have those, but I think it just makes it a little bit cleaner, maybe a little bit easier to understand as well. Now let's go to our group inputs. So there are a couple of group inputs we might want. Now in this roughness generator on its own, I don't think we really want many of these. Maybe we want to take the scale and plug that in. So we have scale. Now by default, scale is going to come in as a float with a default value of whatever we have selected. And I think that's fine. Minimum and maximum are 10,000. And negative 10,000, but I think we'll keep those where they are for the moment. Now we have this brightness contrast. I don't think I want to keep any of that in there. I think we'll also come back to these flags and we'll just deal with our base color. So B and B in both of these slots is going to be our default base color. So we can plug both of those into the same slot and we'll call this original diffuse. The next thing we want to do is use this factor in this lighting node. This is going to be our roughness influence. We'll plug this in and call this roughness influence. And bear in mind, you can tab out anytime you want to have a look at how this affects it. So you can see as we increase this roughness influence up, our map has more effect on the roughness. So if you want to just generally discolor an object without affecting the roughness too much, you can just have this value quite low. You'll still get an effect of the roughness, but it won't be quite as strong as if it's all the way up. Go back into that node group now, and let's do the same with height. Now, I specifically left something out on height. The thing I left out when looking at the height is we don't have a mix node in here to add any kind of influence. We also don't have a strength for the bump map because we left that outside the node, and that's perfectly fine. We don't necessarily need that. But what we will do is we will take a mixed color node and apply this in here. Now what I think I might do is just put this in between the color ramp and the RGB channel. This is going to go in slot 2. And because when we do a height map with this dirt and we're adding this dirt in, what we want to do is add this. We don't want to remove any values. So the safest option in our setting here is just to use add, and now we also have a factor to determine how much of that is in. So if we don't want any height change, we just turn this factor all the way down and we can increase or decrease that as much as we want. You can see a little change makes a big result in here. So we will be relying on the strength of this height map when we add it into a bump node later on. But for the moment, let's grab this factor and plug it in here. This is going to be our height influence. And if we already have a bump map on our object, we're also wanting this map here. This is going to be our original height. So now if we have anything like scratches or bumps or any kind of normal map, we can apply dirt on top of that. It will layer on top. So now the tricky part. Now we have to connect up these flags. So as I said before, we're probably going to take this black flag and just clamp this between about 0 and 0.15. just to determine how thick we want this dirt. So I think what we will do is call this dirt thickness. And we also want to clamp this white flag and call this maybe dirt density. So you can see how as we decrease this down, we get to the point where we just get very sporadic little bits of dirt. It's not very thick. And I think around about a default value here, let's try 0.12 for the black flag and 0.125 for the white flag as our mins and maximums. So let's come back out of here. We have a few things already set up. They seem to be working fine. We need our inputs for our flags. So let's just click on our node group plus a couple of times. So this first one is going to be our dirt thickness. The second one is going to be dirt density. We'll come back out. Dirt thickness, we will change. Now at the moment we have these as colors, so we don't want those as colors. We want these as floats. So let's do that just now. You can see because we hit the plus button, they just took this original height and duplicated it over, which is why they came in as color instead of floats. But we definitely want floats in there. So floats for both of those. Dirt thickness is going to be a default of, I think we'll go with 1.2 for that. The minimum is going to be 0. The maximum is going to be 1.2. Now, have I just made a mistake? Yes, I have. It's 0.12 and 0.12. Dirt density is going to have a default of, let's go with 1. The minimum for that is going to be 0.125 and the maximum is going to be 1. So now if we come out of that, this only goes up to 0.12 and this should be at a default of 1. It should only go down to 0.125. Okay, so those settings seem to work. Let's copy this driver and let's paste this onto the black flag. Let's come back out. Let's copy this driver, copy as new driver and paste this onto the white flag. So dirt thickness, we can increase the thickness of the dirt. That seems to work well. And dirt density, that seems to work well too. Now let's just make sure everything else is working fine. Height influence, take that down. That seems to work. Roughness influence, that seems to work as well. Original base color, let's try something like this green. That seems to work fine. Let's take our... Okay, so one setting that we don't have here is we don't have our dirt color in yet. So let's grab that. So that is slot A here. We'll plug this in. Slot A, dirt color. Okay, and we do have one other setting that I think I would like to change. Let's change this original color back so I can test this a little bit easier. Now let's open this up a bit so I can just make sure I'm using the same things. Original height, that's fine, that can be where it is. Dirt color, black, that's fine. Dirt thickness will increase all the way up. That's a bit easier to see. Roughness influence will increase that as well. So one other setting that I was thinking about changing was this factor here. So this is dirt transparency, I guess, or dirt strength. But we don't really want a value of 0 to be high strength. We would rather that was 1. So we're going to have to do a little tricky bit of math here. So let's plug this in where it is just now and change the name of it. Dirt strength. Okay, so it's challenge time. And this is a tricky challenge. And it's all to do with math nodes. So the challenge is use the math node to convert a value of 0 to 1, but also it has to convert the value of 1 to 0. So this is a little bit tricky, but I'll give you a hint. First, you have to make the value negative, and then you have to add 1. So you can do this using multiple math nodes, but it is possible to use a single math node. So as I said, this is very tricky, but please pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment and I'll show you how I would do it. Okay, so I hope you got on okay with that challenge. Hope you managed to find the correct math nodes or even a single node to do it. I'll show you how I would do it with a single math node. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to do math, plug this in. Now, if we have a value of 0 going in there, we want a value of 1 coming out, or I should say if we have a value of 1 in here, we want a value of 0 coming out. So we're going to do a multiply add. We're going to multiply by -1, and we're going to add 1. Now, I think the math on this should work. If we have 0 in here and we multiply by -1, we're going to have 0 and we're going to add 1. So 0 now becomes 1. If we increase this up, 1 multiplied by -1 equals -1, and then we add 1, we should get 0. So we've essentially taken a scale of 0 to 1 and made it 1 to 0. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Essentially, this slider now works, and that's all we really need to worry about. Our values should work out fine. Again, we have our dirt density working quite nicely. We have our dirt thickness working quite nicely as well. And that essentially leads us to the end of this node group. Okay, so now that our node group is finished, we have a couple of little finishing touches. First of all, let's change the name of this node group. So we'll call it DirtGen, and we'll change that in the label as well. And lastly, the next thing we have to do is we'll just go to Blender File, find our node group, we'll open that up. Now we already have Roughness Generator as part of our asset browser, but we have to have this node group as well. Now the name of this needs to be changed also in here, so let's do that. And now you can see that's changed to DirtGen. We'll click on this, we'll mark this as an asset, and now we just have to make sure we save our file in our asset browser folder. So I'll do that now under node groups, and this is going to be our DirtGen file. So I'll just save that in there. In the next video, we are going to move on to a procedural scratch generation node. I'll see you then.